This is Greek with David Hutchison. Participles Function. This is our second lesson on participles. In our previous lesson, we discussed the form of participles, and today we'll focus on function. How do participles work? Recall that participles are verbal adjectives. This means they are hybrids. They're part verb and part adjective. The first part is the verb part. The second part is the adjective part. So this is a verb stem with adjective endings. When you look up the lexical form of a participle, you're looking up a verb. Recall also the good news that participles used verb keys that you already know, and they also used endings that you already know. These were noun/adjective endings. And then please do remember that the article is extremely important for all of Greek. But when you get to a form that may look a little bit funny, you're hoping that the article is there with it. Sometimes that's the case with participles. So the article truly can be your best friend in recognizing some difficult forms, and sometimes those forms are participles. Participles are ing words, such as the running man, the sleeping child, the thinking student, while walking to the store, after watching this lesson. All of these in Greek are examples of participles. We can modify these translations just a little bit and still express the same idea, and sometimes in Greek you'll do the same thing to a participle. So instead of saying the running man, you could also say the man who is running. You're still expressing the same idea. The sleeping child could also be the child who is sleeping. The thinking student could also be the student who is thinking. Participles have three basic functions. They can be attributive, where they attribute a quality to a noun. Substantival, they act like a noun. Or adverbial, they function like an adverb in the sentence. Some of the basic options for an adverbial participle are those which answer questions of time, while or after, or those which answer questions of cause, because. Now you could group participle function under two main headings, because remember, a participle is a hybrid, a part verb and part adjective. There can be a verbal function where it functions like an adverb, and then there can be an adjectival function, and under that adjectival heading you could put attributive and substantival. So that is an appropriate way to group it. In practical terms, however, I think it's probably best just to go ahead and tease out the fact that you really have three basic functions. It can be attributive, substantival, or adverbial. So let's start with attributive participles. An attributive participle attributes a quality to a noun. The attributive participle usually has an article. That's very good news. And it will be in the attributive position. You remember we had attributive position with adjectives. The adjective noun. Instead of adjective, just stick participle in that slot. The participle noun. That's one of the attributive positions. That's the one that looks most like English. The wise student, the adjective noun. We also had the noun, the adjective, and so we can have the noun, the participle. Just like an attributive adjective, an attributive participle would agree with the noun that it modifies in case, gender, and number. So here's an example of an attributive participle. Ha anthropos, ha legon. Or in the second line, ha legon anthropos. This would be the speaking man, or the man who is speaking. Then you have the verb blepe. So the speaking man sees ton doulon, the servant. So the participle legon modifies anthropos. It could do it in either one of these positions, the noun, the participle, or the participle noun. They both mean the same thing. So it agrees with anthropos in case, gender, and number. And so we could say the man who speaks, or the speaking man, either way is fine. The man who speaks, or the speaking man, sees the servant. It's modifying the noun anthropos, so it's attributive. I'm going to show you some other examples from the New Testament reflecting different tense and voice combinations. So here's a present active participle to didontos. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask, and then here we go, para to didontos theou. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask from God. But what kind of a God? It's to didontos God, from the giving God, or the God who gives. So here it's just in this attributive position. It modifies the noun theou, so it agrees in case, gender, number. Here's one that's aorist active. Ha pater, ha pimpsos me. So the noun is ha pater, the father. What kind of a father? It's the father who sent me. The sending me father. The father who sent me. Here's one that's perfect active. Peri de ton pepistukaton ethnon. About the Gentiles. What kind of Gentiles? The having believed Gentiles. So we can say about the Gentiles who have, that's the perfect part, believed. About the Gentiles who have believed. Here's one that's aorist passive. Tis he Sophia, he dathe sa tuto. What is the wisdom? What kind of wisdom? It's aorist passive. It's wisdom that was given tuto, to him. What is the wisdom that was given to him? So that aorist passive participle has that theta epsilon key. This one modifies the noun Sophia. Since Sophia is feminine, the participle is feminine. Since the noun is nominative singular, the participle is nominative singular. Do you notice how that article helps? Because even if you don't recognize dathesa as nominative feminine singular, it is this ending like pasa. Even if you didn't recognize that as nominative feminine singular, you look right next to it and you see the article, and you say, oh, I think this is nominative feminine singular. So all of these are attributive participles, participles that attribute a quality to a noun. They act just like an attributive adjective. Another thing a participle can do is act like a noun. We call this a substantival participle. So it will function like a noun in the sentence. There's no noun for the participle to modify. There's no noun that's in proper position that the participle is modifying. The participle is acting on its own. It's not modifying something else. Since it's acting on its own, it could be any case, gender, or number, just depending on whatever it's doing in the sentence. If it's a subject, it's got to be nominative. If it's a direct object, it'll be accusative. If it's an object of a preposition, it'll be whatever case that preposition tells it to be. So let's look at this one. Ha legon blepe ton doulon. So ha legon is our participle, the participle. This one's functioning like a noun. It's going to be the subject of that verb blepe. Now notice it's not modifying any noun. It's not the speaking disciple or the speaking apostle or any other noun, there's no noun for it to modify. It's on its own. It's not in one of those attributive positions. It's not agreeing with something in case, gender, number. So it's on its own. So what we could say is the one who speaks, the speaking one. Since it's masculine, we could say the man who speaks. But usually if you do a generic translation, the one who speaks, that's how they would do it. Now if it were feminine, then they're intentionally saying this is the woman who speaks. And if it were neuter, it would be the thing that speaks. But for the masculine, a good basic normal translation is the one who speaks, unless you think it's emphasizing someone's maleness, in which case you would say the man who speaks. So this would be acting like a subject of the verb blepe. The one who speaks sees the servant. So here's some substantival participles. This first one, I have an example. The first one is going to be dative, and then the second highlighted one is accusative. You know what helps me to identify those very quickly? The article. Tois pistuusin epi ton egeronta Yesun ton kurion hemon ek nekron. So the first participle is dative plural. And this particular function is like an indirect object. So we add the word to. To the ones who believe epi, upon or in. What do they believe upon or in? Ton egeronta Yesun ton kurion hemon ek nekron. They are believing in the one who raised. This is aorist active. This is one of these liquid verbs. Liquid verbs don't like sigmas, so the sigma went away. Egeronta, the one who raised Jesus our Lord from the dead. Now the second participle actually takes a direct object. This one raised Jesus. So it's not modifying Yesun. Yesun is the direct object. The one who raised Jesus our Lord from the dead. Here's one that's perfect active. So we're going to have the have or has idea. Ha heorakos eme heorakin ton patera. The one who has seen me, that's the participle plus the me. The one who has seen me, then here's the verb, heorakin, has seen the Father. So this participle is acting like the subject. It's the subject of the verb, heorakin. Here's one that's present passive. This one is dative. In tois sodza menois. Among those who are being saved. That's the present passive. Being saved. This one is dative. It's not modifying another noun. It's acting like a noun. Then here's one that's perfect passive. Pas ha gegene menos ek tu theou hamartian u poie. So the participle is ha gegene menos, one who has been born. This is from genao. It's modified by pas, so it's everyone who has been born, ek tu theou, of God. Then hamartian is the direct object, and u poie is the verb. So everyone who has been born of God does not practice sin, does not keep on sinning. Now, by the way, one of the aspects of a present tense verb is that it can be action in progress, can reflect an ongoing continual activity. It doesn't have to, but it can. And I think that's what's going on here. It's not that someone who is saved never sins again, period. It's rather that someone who has been born of God does not make a habit of sinning. Their life is not characterized by sin. Instead, their life is characterized by repentance and faith and belief and works resulting from faith. If you're not sure about this, read elsewhere in the letter where John says if we say that we don't have sin, we're calling God a liar. So John knows that Christians sin. So all these participles, they're substantival. They're not modifying a noun. They're acting like a noun. They're performing a noun function in the sentence, so they're substantival. Now let's look at adverbial participles. An adverbial participle functions like an adverb. It does the type of things that an adverb could do. Oftentimes, they can answer a question of time or cause. Here's a big word. You'd be wise not to use it very often in life. It will get you in trouble. If you're dating or married, you probably know what I mean. Don't say never. You never do such and such. You're in trouble if you do that. But sometimes you can say never, and here we can say never. The adverbial participle never has an article. So guess what? If you see a participle with an article, it is not what? It is not adverbial. An attributive participle or a substantival participle, they'll often have the articles. They don't have to, so they can or they may not. But an adverbial participle never has an article. So here the participle legon does not have an article. Legon ha anthropos blepe ton doulon. Participle has no article. There's no article right in front of it. If we translate this one focusing on time, we could say, while speaking, the man sees the servant. Subject, verb, object. The man sees the servant. When? That's a question of an adverbial nature. When does the man see the servant? He sees the servant while speaking. Now, who's doing the speaking? The man is. So no article, and it's not in attributive position. Adverbial participles can do time. They can also do cause. I'm going to give you just a quick list of the different things an adverbial participle can do. When you see a participle that's adverbial, it's a helpful practice just to run down this list with these keywords and see if it expresses the idea in context. If the idea is cause, you would say because. If the idea is means, you would use by means of. Purpose, in order to. Result, with the result that. Concession is the idea although. Conditional, if. And then there's one called a piggybacking participle, which piggybacks on the main verb that it modifies. It kind of grabs onto some of the force of the main verb. I'll show you an example of this in a minute. Here's a present active participle. Yosef de ha aner autes. Now Joseph, her husband, dikaios on, being righteous, kai me thelon, and not wanting. This is where Joseph is deciding to divorce Mary quietly. If you were engaged in the first century in a Jewish context and you want to break an engagement, it requires a divorce. So you could run down the list of these different options we said a moment ago. We said while. Joseph, while he was righteous. Maybe it's cause, maybe it's since he was righteous. So you can run down all these different options to see which one makes the most sense in context. Here's one that's present passive. Kai autas edidasken in tais synagogais auton doxodzamenos hupapanton. And he was teaching in their synagogues. Then here's the participle. Doxodzamenos hupapanton. Being glorified. This is present passive. Being glorified by all. I think this one might be a result participle, with the result that he was being glorified. Here's an aorist passive participle. This is from the Great Commission. Poreuthentes un mathetusete panta ta ethne. Couple of different translations here, and I'll explain why. The first one, therefore go and make disciples of all nations. Or, therefore, as you go, make disciples of all nations. So the word poreuthentes is a participle. That's the word we're trying to figure out how to translate. The word in the middle, mathetusete, that is an imperative. That's a command. We'll study those soon. That's the main point of this verse. Make disciples. But what kind of participle is poreuthentes? If it's a temporal participle, one of these that's talking about time, then what it would be saying is, as you go, make disciples. If it's a piggybacking participle, it jumps onto that imperative and kind of picks up some of its force. So that's why you would translate it, go and make disciples. Now, based on some detailed studies of these participles in Matthew, scholars have argued that this one most likely is the piggybacking participle. And so it picks up some of the force of that imperative, make disciples. It's important to remember, though, even with a piggybacking participle, it's grabbing some of the force of the verb that it modifies, but still the main emphasis is the main verb. So the main emphasis of this verse is not the going, but it's the making disciples. That's the main point. But probably this is a piggybacking participle. It's okay to translate this go and make disciples. There is an imperative force to go. You've got to go. But the main point is you've got to make disciples. And for that matter, you can make disciples wherever you are. Now, after this verse, there are a couple of other participles that tell you how you're going to make disciples. You're going to baptize them, and you're going to teach them to obey everything that Jesus has commanded. I want to explain something called a Genitive Absolute. If you've got a participle and it needs to have a subject other than the subject of the main verb, the participle and its subject will be genitive. So you've got a participle. The one performing the action of the participle is not the same one performing the action of the main verb. So I need a different subject. The participle and the subject will be in the genitive case. So here's a participle, apontone. The ones performing that participle are tone, mathetone. The main verb is exalthon, and the subject is apostoloi. So the main idea of the sentence is the apostles went out, but then who's performing the action of the participle? Here it's not hoi apostoloi, but instead it's the disciples, tone, mathetone. So the participle is genitive and its subject is genitive. This is called a genitive absolute. The word absolute comes from a word that means loosed. So it's kind of loosed from the normal bounds of the sentence. So we saw that participles can have three basic functions. They can be attributive, substantival, or adverbial. So here are a couple of questions to help you on the road to identifying them. Does the participle have an article? If it has an article, you can say it is absolutely, positively, 100% not adverbial. If there's no article, well then it could be anything. Could be adverbial, could be attributive, could be substantival. Is there a noun for the participle to modify? In other words, is it in an attributive position, and does it agree in case, gender, and number? If the answer is yes, the participle is attributive. If the answer is no, the participle is not attributive. Now let's talk a little bit about time in participles, and primarily here this is focusing on adverbial participles. The time of the participle is related to the time of the main verb. In fact, the time aspect of a participle is a very small deal. The big deal about a participle is its kind of action. That word is called aspect. When we're outside of the indicative mood, the time element shrinks quite a bit, and the kind of action element grows even bigger than it already was. So a present tense participle happens at the same time as the main verb. So some people will call these continuous participles. But just say present tense participle equals same time. In an aorist participle or a perfect tense participle, they happen before the main verb. So aorist or perfect tense equals prior time. Think about it this way. If we've got a timeline, you see where the dot says main verb. A present tense participle would happen at the same time. So we would use the word while if it's doing a time sort of thing. While. Now look at the aorist or perfect participle. The main verb happens after the aorist or perfect participle, so we would use the word after. The aorist or perfect participle happened before, the main verb happened after, so we'll use the keyword after. So present tense participles happen at the same time. Think present tense equals same time. So it doesn't matter when the main verb occurs, the participle occurs at the same time. So let's just say, while watching the Olympics, that's our participle, while watching. Then look at the main verb. I was eating an apple. The participle happened at the same time. When was that time? Well, it says I was eating, so I know the time is in the past, but the participle's at the same time. Now let's say while watching the Olympics, I am eating an apple. Present tense participle, same time. Let's do one in the future. While watching the Olympics, I will eat an apple. So that participle goes at the same time as that main verb. It doesn't matter where the main verb goes. Wherever you go, I will go. So we use the keyword while. Now that aorist or perfect tense participle, the main verb happens after it. And I think that's the way to think of it. The main verb happens after the aorist participle, after the perfect participle, then the main verb. Use the keyword after. Now I'll give you one exception here. Aorist participles can happen at the same time as aorist main verbs. Aorist participles can happen at the same time as aorist main verbs. How are you going to know? You're going to have to explore the context. Try both options. See which one makes the best sense of the context. So let's talk about this word aspect again. Outside of the indicative mood, the time element of tense diminishes significantly. So in the indicative mood, all the different verbs we've studied before, time was a part. Scholars disagree on how big of a part. In my view, time is a pretty big part of the indicative mood. It's not all there is, but it's a pretty big part of it. Outside of the indicative mood, time is pretty small and sometimes not evident at all. What becomes more prominent is this notion of aspect. And a simple definition of aspect is kind of action in context. So what will a present tense verb form do? Its aspect is action in progress. It's progressive or continuous. The aorist tense, the word aorist means undefined. Aorist tense is pretty plain. It's pretty simple. It's kind of like saying no comment. So in a very real sense, The aorist tense would be your default choice if you're just making a plain, simple statement. So you will not be surprised to see a lot of aorists anytime you're outside of the indicative mood. It's kind of the plain, simple rice cake, no comment. Ice milk, no flavor. Bland toast. Wearing khaki pants with khaki socks, khaki shoes, khaki shirt. That's the aorist tense. But the present tense is action in progress. There's a little more color there, a little more flavor. The perfect tense, even more color still. The perfect tense refers to a present state of affairs resulting from a past action. So these sorts of things become bigger outside of the indicative mood. We'll talk more about this in the future, but I want you to at least dip your toes in the water of aspect. So here on the time element in an adverbial participle, here's present tense, keyword while, tauta autou laluntas, paloi epistuson eis auton. So this participle is an adverbial participle, and it's expressing a time idea. It's present tense, so we'll say while. Now this one also happens to be a genitive absolute because the subject of the participle is autou, he. While he was speaking tauta, these things, then subject paloi, it's the subject of epistuson, many believed, eis auton. So present tense, keyword while. Aorist tense, keyword after. Akousasa peri tu Jesu, hepsata tu hematiu autou. After hearing about Jesus, then I'm moving to the end of the sentence, she touched his robe. Aorist, so keyword after. This is the woman who touches Jesus' robe and is healed because of her faith. Now keep in mind, she is healed because of faith, but it's not just faith, period. It's faith properly placed. What happens if some woman has complete faith, genuine, sincere faith, that she can touch the hem of your jeans and will be healed from all of her maladies? She's still going to be sick because that faith is improperly placed. But she trusted in Jesus. Jesus had that power. She touched him, faith properly placed. She was healed. So let's review. Participles have three basic functions. Attributive, it attributes a quality to a noun. Substantival, functions like a noun in the sentence. Adverbial, functions like an adverb, often answering questions of time or cause. And remember that bigger list I gave you as well. Remember our two helpful questions. Does the participle have an article? Yes. If there is an article, it's not adverbial. No? Well, then it could be adverbial. Could be anything. Is there a noun for the participle to modify? If so, it's attributive. In other words, if it agrees with a noun in case, gender, number, and it's in attributive position. If no, well, then it's not attributive. Could be anything. So let's see if we can identify how some of these participles are functioning. Ha apostolos, ha legon tauta, genoske ton kurion. This is translated as the apostle who says these things knows the Lord. Does the participle have an article? Yes. So we can say it's not adverbial. So it's either attributive or substantival. Is there a noun for the participle to modify? Yes, it's modifying apostolos, so we can say it's attributive. It's the noun The participle, this is an attributive position. It agrees in case, gender, or number. So this is an attributive participle. Attributive. Ha legon tauta gnoske ton kurion. Translated, the one who says tauta, the one who says these things, gnoske ton kurion. Let's try our two questions. Does the participle have an article? Yes. It's not adverbial. Is there a noun for the participle to modify? Is there a noun that it agrees with in case, gender, number? And is it in attributive position? The noun, the participle, or the participle noun? No, it's not attributive. It's not adverbial. It's not attributive. It's substantival. It's acting like a noun. This one is the subject of the verb gnoske. The one who says these things, gnoske ton kurion. Legon tauta ha apostolos blepe ton doulon. Here's the translation. While saying these things, the apostle sees the servant. Does the participle have an article? No, so it could be adverbial. It doesn't have to be adverbial, but it could be. Is there a noun for the participle to modify? Does it agree with that noun in case, gender, number, and is it in attributive position? No, it's not in the attributive position. So it's not attributive. This one is adverbial. While saying these things, so this is adverbial, and we could say it's answering a question of time. And since it's present tense, we use that keyword while, because present tense equals same time. Ha anthropos ha pimpsos tous apostolus dikaios estin. Does the participle have an article? Yes, it's not adverbial. Is there a noun for the participle to modify? Does it agree in case, gender, or number? Is it in attributive position? Yes, it's in attributive position. It modifies ha anthropos, the noun, the participle. So this one is attributive. And we would translate it, the man who sent the apostles, the sending man, the sending the apostles man, that man is righteous. Epon tauta ha apostolos eblepse ton doulon. Does the participle have an article? No. Could be adverbial. Is there a noun for the participle to modify? No. So it's not in the attributive position, so it's not an attributive participle. This one turns out to be adverbial. You could try an adverbial option or a substantival option. If we've got all of the other elements in the sentence, we're not missing any noun, that decreases the likelihood of something being substantival. This one is adverbial. After he had said these things, or after saying these things, the apostle saw the servant. This one is aorist, so we use that keyword after. Pistuamen in to pimpanti auton. Does the participle have an article? Yes. It cannot be adverbial. Is there a noun for the participle to modify? Is there a noun that it agrees with in case, gender, and number? And is it in attributive position to that noun? No, there's not. This participle is dative, singular. There's no dative, singular noun for that participle to modify. So it's not attributive. This one turns out to be substantival because it's not adverbial, it's not attributive, it has to be substantival. We believe in
to pimpanti auton. We believe in the one sending him. We believe in the one who is sending him.